Welcome back to this final part of Murder with Friends. Today we're talking about Gilles De Rais, who was convicted and put to death for the murder of over 100 deaths of children, brutal murders. But there are people today that say he was totally innocent of all of this. Now, why do they say this? I'm joined today by Cecilia Betzel. Cecilia, thank you for making it all the way to this part 3 with me. What a journey we've been on.
What a journey.
So this is sort of a modern phenomena that when people have gone back and examined the story of Gilles De Rais, they've said, well, there isn't a whole bunch of, I was gonna say forensic evidence, but duh.
Yeah.
There isn't a lot of evidence here outside of the testimony that was presented at his trial, and even those people are saying that's questionable. You couldn't enter that into a modern day court of law. What do you think about all this?
I think an interesting fact about all this is that so much of the argument and the evidence against his or for his innocence all took place in France, all written in French and has not been translated into English. So a lot of people in France believe that he's innocent, but everywhere else in the world they haven't got there yet because they have no access to it unless they speak French.
Well, I also think that there's probably the interest isn't there. I mean, this was a case, I hadn't even heard of this guy until I think I'd seen his name pop up a little bit in the comment section. I really like when people recommend cases. And then I did a little bit of digging, and Amir was the one that said, we really should look into this case because it seems like there are a lot of layers here. But I was unfamiliar.
He's really famous in France. Like, it's kind of interesting that, you know.
Well, he's the character of which the Bluebeard is based off of. And so
Charles Perrault?
Yeah. So he's sort of transcended his own legacy in the sense that he is now a fictional character who is beloved. Yeah, sure. Like he is, his legacy will live on past just what he did and was convicted of in his own lifetime. I want to toss to a clip right now from historian Robert Wild. Basically, it's a quote summing up on why there are some scholars that believe that De Rais is innocent.
To this day, many scholars believe De Rais was an innocent man who fell victim to a scheme orchestrated by a draconian Catholic Church. Historian Robert Wild explains, quote, "There is an alternative school of thought, one which argues that Gilles De Rais was set up by the authorities who had an interest in taking what remained of his wealth and was actually innocent. The fact his confession was extracted through threat of torture is cited as evidence of severe doubt. Gilles wouldn't be the first European who was set up so people could take his wealth and remove power by jealous rivals, and the Knights Templar are a very famous example, while Countess Bathory is in much the same position as Gilles," end quote.
I think this is interesting, and something that Amir brought up before we went to tape was, all right, if it was a conspiracy, why don't we see many more of that now that we have a modern eye to look back on these older events? Why is it just, a couple examples here and there, the Knights Templar, Elizabeth Bathory, maybe Gilles De Rais? Why aren't there so many more that we can exonerate within the lens of historical backing?
I mean, I think a lot of people or historians do have opinions on the church at the time and how much power it had and how many people died because of that. But I guess these few individuals just happen to either it's true or they just got the short end of the stick and they happen to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. And a lot of people say that he was just a victim of an ecclesiastical plot.
But it's so curious because they had enough to convict him. Arguably they would have enough to put him to death maybe, because again, Joan of Arc was put to death for witchcraft, among other crimes that she was accused of, and that's something that we now look back on.
Yeah, I mean, there's clearly no proof of her witchcraftiness.
Yeah.
She was captured by the English and killed.
Yeah, she's a crafty woman. It doesn't make her a witch.
Yeah, they could have easily. I'm sort of the belief that where there's smoke, there's fire.
Okay.
And I think that, again, the details, the morbidity of the whole story. I kind of am of the belief that there's something there.
So I'll push back just to make the conversation interesting. Something that stuck out to me was when his accomplice Poitou was describing how they would incinerate the bodies, and what kept coming up for me is the case of Stephen Avery, where he had burned the body in a burn pit, but he couldn't burn the whole body, so there were still remains that were left, and that was that he'd burned it outside. So I'm wondering, if he had incinerated, if he had burned so many bodies, why wasn't there a shred of evidence that was produced at trial?
Yeah.
You know, like that's something that I think about. Why wasn't it takes an incredible amount of heat to fully burn a body.
But I think, you know, just to make the argument again, I mean, what if they're burning all these bodies, and they were burning them in fireplaces too. It wasn't like it was outside in the forest.
Right.
And then, you know, you get some teeth and things left over, and maybe they just swept them up and put them in a lake or something.
And that would also explain why they didn't turn up any bodies.
Well, because it's not like there's a police force coming through the castle and like, you know, checking with their magnifying glasses.
Yeah.
Like there's stuff that just is pushed under the carpet.
Yeah, I am inclined to believe sort of to a similar conclusion that we came to in the case of Elizabeth Bathory, which was like something happened here.
Yeah.
I do not believe that he is guilty of what he has fully been accused of.
He confessed to over 1,000 murders.
That's insane, though. I mean, we talked about that with Elizabeth Bathory.
Yeah.
There's one account where one of his accomplices said that when they were moving castles, because they were just fucking ballers going from castle to castle, that they had to plan ahead and they had to move 40 bodies because they had to move 40 bodies. Think of moving 40 bodies. It's not easy to move one body. Not that I know of that, but I'm just saying that it's a tricky thing to do to move one body, and now you're moving 40, and yet still like no bodies were turned up at trial.
It seemed like it became such a ritual where, you know, they were saying that he would invite these boys to his castle, lure them in with, you know, the luxury life.
Dress them up, that's another thing. Dress them up, treat them
in the finest clothes they'd ever had.
Yeah, the finest evening they could ever imagine, because again,
give them food, give them drink, like some stimulating drink, and then rape them and kill them. And I mean, I don't know how to bring this up without saying something wrong, but it's kind of interesting at the time that clearly homosexuality at the time was not
a thing.
Okay.
Are you saying that you don't like gay people? No. What kind of a show do you think you're on here?
YouTube hates me already. But I mean, if you take these, you know, what he's probably seeing as perversions.
Right.
It's kind of interesting that that's, you know.
What? Are you saying that, okay, but here's the thing, if these are children, it's pedophilia.
I'm saying that if he's going around raping little girls, he'd probably get away with it.
Okay.
But if he's raping little boys, he's like, well, I should probably kill them so they won't tell anybody.
Oh, okay, that is pretty bold. I think that he was making, if he was killing these kids, it was a blood sacrifice, and he had to get them young because as we know that we discussed in part 1, virginity was the best thing that a person could be.
But it became so much more than sacrifice. I kind of feel like it was a thing where he killed that first person to make the sacrifice, realized he really liked it, and then just went to town.
And it created a bloodlust, and because he had a certain amount of power at that time, he could get away with it. Yeah, I think that that's compelling. It's just annoying and frustrating for me that there is no concrete physical evidence that was presented at trial. It comes down to it's all circumstantial, because if this was presented at a modern day trial, you could say that given that a body wasn't produced and these kids were going into his castle and disappearing, that doesn't mean that these kids are even dead.
Yeah.
You know how hard it is to convict someone of murder if you don't have a body, and yet you know, just because you have so many bodies, and there is this correlation that
so many people benefited from his death.
Yeah.
The Duke of Brittany took all of his former lands too. So it wasn't just like the few castles he had left, all of his former lands, and you know, gave them to all of his nobles as he saw fit.
Right. So there were people that had something majorly to gain if De Rais went off the rails, which he was already, you know, doing with his spendthrift ways, this lavish bomb of a play.
Yeah.
You know, just spending all of his money. He was obviously working through something. And then on top of that, now there are rumors that he is dealing with the occult, with Satanism, alchemy. All this stuff is illegal. And then I'm inclined to think of what you said, where there's smoke, there's fire. These kids were disappearing after they went into his castle. There's something here, but was there enough to convict him I'm not sure. But
now,
then
I think what's most interesting is that in Paris in 1992, a group of people came together and had a retrial for him, and they fully exonerated him.
They fully exonerated him. Now, it has been shown that the people that were present at that trial were not totally unbiased.
Yeah.
Because if you're
There were
participating,
no medieval historians, there was no...
Yeah, it was a group of people that were sort of predisposed to believing in his innocence. And I think
UNESCO.
Yeah, and I think it's good to examine history and take a modern eye to it. But every time that I come down and I'm like, no, this guy was totally innocent, I think of the detail in his confession and the confession of his accomplices as well. And it's a sticking point that it's hard for me to move away from, but I really do believe like Elizabeth Bathory was likely set up as well, and how we remember her legacy is another, I think, sort of a misstep in how we tell her story, because the blood countess bathing in blood.
I mean, both of these people have had fairy tales written, created about them.
So it's so ripe for discussion, and I'm really interested to hear what you guys have to say about it in the comment section below. From what you've researched, and maybe you'd heard about it before, maybe you hadn't heard about it before, do you think that there was a conspiracy at play here? Do you think this guy was totally innocent? Do you think that he was totally guilty and this confession proves it? Do you think it's maybe a mix of both? What do you think is happening here?
If we have any viewers in France, I'm curious to hear if you were taught about this in school, if there's a different thought there.
Absolutely. I would be really interested in the different dynamics that are at play with the story of Gilles De Rais, but that's all the time we have on today's show. Thanks for watching Murder with Friends. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel for more of this content, and we will see you next time.